My boyfriend's best friend called me. I need to warn you. He's cheating. I have proof. I said, send it. He hesitated. Promise you won't tell him I told you? When I investigated, I discovered the best friend had fabricated everything because she wanted my boyfriend for herself. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 28 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had a pretty clear picture of what my future looked like. I had been with my boyfriend, Ryan Carter, for almost 2 years. We met at a friend's backyard barbecue, started dating a few weeks later, and eventually moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We had routines, inside jokes, and the kind of comfort that develops when two people genuinely enjoy building a life together. Ryan worked as a nurse at a large hospital, which meant long shifts and unpredictable hours. I worked a more traditional schedule, so there were days when we barely crossed paths. Even so, our relationship felt solid. We communicated well, trusted each other, and talked openly about the future. One of the constants in Ryan's life was Vanessa Miller. They had been friends since college, nearly 10 years. Vanessa showed up at birthdays, holiday dinners, game nights, and weekend gatherings. She knew Ryan's family, his history, and most of the stories from his life before I came along. I never felt threatened by that. If anything, I appreciated that he had people who cared about him. Looking back, there were moments that should have caught my attention. Vanessa asked a lot of questions about our relationship. Was Ryan happy? Did we ever fight? Did I think we were moving too fast? At the time, I dismissed it as concern from a longtime friend. 3 weeks ago, that assumption fell apart. It was a Thursday night. Ryan was working a night shift, and I was sitting on the couch, half watching television when my phone rang. Vanessa. That alone was unusual. She rarely called me directly. When I answered, she sounded nervous. Claire, I need to tell you something. The tension in her voice immediately got my attention. What happened? There was a pause. Then she said, Ryan is cheating on you. My entire body went cold. I sat upright and stared at the blank television screen. What are you talking about? I didn't want to be the one to tell you, she said quickly. But you deserve to know. According to Vanessa, Ryan had been involved with a doctor from the hospital. She claimed she'd seen messages between them and had proof. I asked her to send whatever she had. Before hanging up, she made one odd request. Please don't tell Ryan I told you. The request stuck with me. If she was exposing a betrayal, why was she so worried about Ryan finding out where the information came from? 5 minutes later, screenshots started arriving. There were dozens of messages, flirty conversations, plans to meet, references to keeping secrets. At first glance, they looked convincing. The problem was that the more I read them, the less believable they felt. The conversations sounded generic, almost like someone trying to write an affair instead of documenting a real one. Every message seemed designed to scream cheating rather than reflect how people actually talk. I stayed awake most of the night reviewing them. I cried that night. I wasn't convinced the screenshots were real, but that didn't stop me from being terrified they might be. By morning, I wasn't convinced Ryan was innocent, but I wasn't convinced Vanessa was telling the truth either. When Ryan came home after his shift, he looked exhausted. He kissed my forehead, asked why I was awake, and headed toward the bedroom. There was no panic in his face, no nervous energy, nothing that immediately matched the story I'd been given. Instead of confronting him, I decided to investigate. Over the next few days, I examined everything. I checked the screenshots, compared the timestamps, and traced the phone number. The first major problem appeared quickly. One conversation supposedly happened during a Sunday afternoon when Ryan and I had spent the entire day at his father's birthday party. We'd barely left each other's side. Another timestamp didn't make sense either. Then another. Eventually, I looked up the phone number. It wasn't connected to any doctor at the hospital. It belonged to a Google Voice account. At that point, my suspicion shifted. I stopped asking whether Ryan was cheating. I started asking who wanted me to believe he was. The answer kept leading back to Vanessa. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof. A few days later, I got it. Ryan was getting ready for work when I checked his phone. We had always been open about passwords, so there was nothing secretive about accessing it. I searched for the contact from the screenshots. Nothing. No messages. No hidden conversations. No second account. No mysterious doctor. What I did find was a long message history between Ryan and Vanessa. Most of it looked normal. Then certain patterns started appearing. Vanessa constantly questioned our relationship. She sent articles about cheating partners. She asked whether Ryan was truly happy. She encouraged him to examine problems that didn't exist. The conversations weren't overtly manipulative, but when viewed together, they painted a very different picture. Vanessa wasn't protecting Ryan. She was looking for weaknesses. And every time she failed to find one, she tried creating one. The final piece clicked into place when I found an article she'd sent him 2 months earlier about recognizing signs of an unfaithful partner. Ryan's response had been immediate. Claire is literally the most loyal person I know. Vanessa's reply was much shorter. Just be careful. Reading that exchange changed everything. The screenshots weren't the beginning of her interference. They were the escalation. The moment she stopped planting doubts and started manufacturing evidence. That evening, I finally told Ryan everything. The phone call. The screenshots. The inconsistencies. The Google Voice number. Every concern I'd been collecting for days. I expected disbelief. Instead, Ryan sat quietly for several minutes. He rubbed his face and stared at the screenshots again. Part of me keeps hoping there's another explanation, he admitted. Vanessa has been my friend for almost 10 years. I understood exactly what he meant. If someone had accused one of my closest friends of doing something like this, I would have struggled to believe it too. We spent nearly an hour going through every detail together. By the time we finished comparing notes, the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. Vanessa wasn't trying to save his relationship. She was trying to destroy it. The only thing we didn't know yet was why. The next morning, I sent her a message. I've been looking at everything you sent me. Can we meet? I need someone to talk to. Her reply arrived almost immediately. Of course. Ryan looked at me across the kitchen table. I looked back at him. For the first time all week, we were on the same page. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a test. And if Vanessa was hiding something, she was about to reveal far more than she intended. The next morning, before meeting Vanessa, Ryan and I went over everything one last time. We reviewed the screenshots, the suspicious timestamps, the Google Voice number, and the messages I'd found between the two of them. Ryan looked sick, not because he thought I was wrong, because he was starting to realize I wasn't. I don't understand why she'd do this, he said quietly. That was the one question neither of us could answer, at least not yet. For almost 10 years, Vanessa had been one of the people he trusted most. She knew his family, celebrated holidays with them, and had been present during some of the hardest periods of his life. Discovering that someone like that might be deliberately trying to sabotage his relationship wasn't easy to process. Before I left, Ryan asked one thing. If she admits anything, tell me everything. I promised I would. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived. Students filled half the tables. A few people worked on laptops near the windows. The smell of coffee and pastries hung in the air. I chose a seat near the back where we could talk privately. A few minutes later, Vanessa walked in. The first thing I noticed was how much effort she'd put into her appearance. Her hair was styled. Her makeup was flawless. She wasn't dressed casually. She looked like someone hoping to make an impression. That detail didn't mean much by itself. Combined with everything else, it made me pay closer attention. When she sat down, she immediately gave me a sympathetic smile. How are you holding up? I forced a tired laugh. Honestly, not great. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry you're going through this. The gesture would have seemed comforting a week earlier. Now it felt rehearsed. For the first few minutes, I let her talk. I asked questions. She repeated the same story she'd told me on the phone. She claimed she'd accidentally discovered the messages. She claimed she'd struggled with whether to tell me. She claimed she only came forward because she cared about Ryan and couldn't watch him make a mistake. Then I started asking harder questions. The shift in her expression was immediate. The timestamps don't match. She blinked. What do you mean? I explained. One date, then another, then another. Every inconsistency I'd found. At first, she tried to explain them away. Maybe Ryan had another phone. Maybe he deleted evidence. Maybe I didn't know everything. The explanations became weaker the longer the conversation continued. Then I mentioned the Google Voice number. I don't know anything about that number. Really? I slid another screenshot across the table. Because it was created 2 days before you called me. For the first time, she stopped answering immediately. That hesitation told me more than any speech could have. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. The screen displayed several conversations between her and Ryan. Messages where she'd questioned our relationship. Messages where she'd suggested he deserved better. Messages where she'd repeatedly encouraged him to examine problems that didn't exist. The color slowly drained from her face. Why were you doing this? I asked. Vanessa tightened her grip around the coffee cup. I'm his friend. Friends don't fabricate evidence. Her eyes snapped back toward mine. I was trying to help him. Help him do what? She didn't answer. I waited. The silence stretched between us. Eventually, she let out a long breath and leaned back in her chair. What happened next wasn't dramatic. There was no emotional breakdown. No tears. No screaming. Just exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had spent too long maintaining a lie. You wouldn't understand. I held her gaze. Try me. For several seconds, she stared at the table. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded completely different. Quieter. More honest. You think you figured everything out? Vanessa shook her head. You still don't understand. One day you'll understand why I did it. Then she walked away. At that point, I stopped looking for explanations and started paying attention to her actions. The actions told their own story. Whatever her motivation was, it had clearly crossed the line into manipulation. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to discuss. I stood up. Vanessa looked nervous for the first time all afternoon. What's going to happen now? I picked up my bag. Ryan already knows. The panic that crossed her face was impossible to miss. You told him? Everything. For a second, she looked like she might argue. Instead, she just stared at me. The reality of the situation was finally catching up with her. Ryan knew. The lies were exposed. And whatever secret she'd been hiding was finally catching up with her. I left the coffee shop and called Ryan immediately. When he answered, I could hear the tension in his voice. How did it go? I walked slowly toward my car. She practically confirmed what we'd suspected. Silence. Then a long breath. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ryan asked the question he'd been avoiding all week. Why? I looked across the parking lot. Because after everything I'd heard, I had a growing suspicion. I don't think this was ever really about me. That night, Ryan sent Vanessa a message. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't emotional. It was final. He told her he knew the truth. He told her the friendship was over. And he told her not to contact either of us again. Within minutes, he had blocked her everywhere he could think of. Later that night, Ryan sat on the couch scrolling through old photos. Birthdays, road trips, graduation parties, memories that suddenly felt different. After a long silence, he shook his head. I don't know which version of her was real anymore. It was the first time I realized he wasn't just angry. He was grieving. For nearly 10 years, Vanessa had been one of the closest people in his life. In less than a week, she became someone he never wanted to hear from again. At the time, we thought that was the end of the story. We were wrong, because losing Ryan wasn't enough for Vanessa. And what she did next would turn a personal betrayal into a legal nightmare. For about a week after Ryan ended the friendship, things were quiet. Too quiet. Part of me hoped Vanessa had finally accepted reality. Part of me knew better. People who spend years convincing themselves they deserve something rarely let go overnight. The first signs appeared through mutual friends. At first, it seemed harmless. A text asking whether Ryan and I were okay. A phone call from someone wanting to hear our side. A casual question about what had happened between Ryan and Vanessa. The wording caught my attention immediately. Our side. That meant another version of the story was already circulating. And it didn't take long to find out who was telling it. Vanessa had started reframing everything. Depending on who she spoke to, she claimed she was trying to protect Ryan, that she had been misunderstood, or that she was being unfairly punished for caring too much. The details changed. The theme stayed the same. She never accepted responsibility. Ryan and I ignored it at first. We wanted our lives back. Unfortunately, Vanessa wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, Ryan came home looking furious. The moment he walked through the apartment door, I knew something had happened. What is it? He dropped his work bag onto the floor. I got called into HR. My stomach tightened immediately. According to the hospital, an anonymous complaint had been filed, accusing Ryan of having an inappropriate relationship with a married physician. Attached to the complaint were screenshots. The same screenshots we already had strong reason to believe were fabricated. I honestly couldn't believe it. She had been confronted. She knew we had seen through the lies. She knew Ryan knew the truth. And she still kept going. The hospital launched an investigation because they had no choice. Fortunately, facts are stubborn things. Communication records didn't support the accusation. The physician involved had no idea why her name was being mentioned. The investigation dragged on for nearly 2 weeks. Ryan barely slept during that period. Every unexpected phone call made him tense. Every email notification made both of us nervous. We knew the accusations were false, but that didn't stop us from worrying about the damage they could cause. But that didn't erase the damage. Rumors spread. Questions circulated. A few coworkers looked at Ryan differently. Anyone who's ever been falsely accused knows that even when you're cleared, the experience leaves a mark. That night, Ryan sat on the edge of our bed and asked a question I couldn't answer. How do you spend 10 years caring about someone and end up here? I didn't have a perfect response. All I knew was that Vanessa had spent too much time imagining the future she wanted and not enough time accepting the reality she had. When reality refused to cooperate, she tried to force it, and everyone around her paid the price. That was the moment Ryan and I stopped hoping the situation would solve itself. We contacted an attorney. We brought every message, every screenshot, every phone record, and every piece of documentation we had collected. The attorney reviewed everything carefully. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You have a strong case." The words weren't exciting. They were reassuring. For weeks, we'd felt like we were trapped inside someone else's obsession. For the first time, an objective outsider was confirming what we'd known all along. This wasn't drama. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. A cease and desist letter was sent immediately. It demanded that Vanessa stop contacting us, stop spreading false information, and retract the accusations she'd made. 3 days later, her attorney responded. They denied responsibility, requested mediation, claimed Vanessa had acted in good faith. The explanation was almost insulting. Ryan looked at me after reading it. She admitted it. I know. So how are they arguing good faith? Because admitting the truth is expensive. That turned out to be exactly what was happening. The deeper the legal process went, the worse things became for Vanessa. Evidence piled up. Messages contradicted her claims. Witnesses compared stories. People she'd spoken to started realizing she'd been telling different versions of the same events. The cracks became impossible to hide. Then came the letter. 12 pages. Hand-delivered by her mother. Ryan and I sat on the couch reading it together. By the third page, we both understood exactly what we were reading. It wasn't really an apology. It was an explanation. Page after page focused on Vanessa's insecurities, loneliness, disappointments, and regrets. For the first time, she openly admitted that her feelings for Ryan had blurred her judgment for years. Everything explained why she'd done what she'd done. Very little acknowledged the damage she'd caused. When we finished reading, Ryan set the letter aside and sat quietly for several minutes. "You know what's sad?" he finally asked. "What?" If she'd been honest years ago, we probably could have handled this without destroying everything. He wasn't saying he would have chosen her. He wouldn't have. What he meant was that honesty would have given everyone a chance to deal with reality before it became a disaster. Instead, she spent years building resentment and convincing herself that Ryan's life should have unfolded differently. The settlement was finalized a few weeks later. Vanessa agreed to terms her attorney had probably advised her to accept long before. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The settlement required a formal written apology, a written retraction of the false accusations, payment of Ryan's legal expenses, a permanent no-contact agreement, and financial penalties if she violated any part of it in the future. The official apology arrived shortly afterward. Unlike the 12-page letter, this apology was direct and surprisingly clear. For the first time, Vanessa formally acknowledged that the screenshots were fabricated and the accusations were false. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was enough. More importantly, it was documented. The same mutual friends who had heard her version of events also received the retraction. Some apologized. Others disappeared quietly. One friend called Ryan personally. "I owe you an apology." Ryan was quiet. "You believed her." "I know. And I'm sorry." A few admitted they had believed her at first. Honestly, I respected those people more than the ones who pretended they'd never doubted us. Ryan's workplace situation improved as well. Once the investigation officially cleared him, the rumors faded. His supervisor even apologized for the stress the process had caused. It didn't erase what happened, but it helped. Life slowly returned to normal. For months, we focused on work, family, travel plans, and everything that had nothing to do with Vanessa. The more distance we created from the situation, the smaller it became. Eventually, entire weeks passed without us mentioning her name. 6 months after the settlement, Ryan and I were sitting on our apartment balcony watching the sunset. We were talking about vacation plans when he suddenly got quiet. I thought he was distracted. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket. The moment I saw the small box, my brain stopped functioning. Ryan laughed nervously, which was honestly adorable because I'd never seen him nervous before. Then he looked at me and smiled. The worst year of my life taught me exactly who I want beside me for the rest of it. By the time he opened the ring box, I was already crying. Of course, I said yes. The following fall, we had a small wedding surrounded by family and close friends. For the first time in a very long time, the day felt peaceful. Everyone who mattered was there, and nobody was trying to tear anything apart. Just people who genuinely cared about us. During his speech, Ryan smiled at me and said, "When someone tried to convince Claire not to trust me, she chose to look for the truth instead." Several guests wiped away tears. So did I. As I stood across from Ryan during the ceremony, I couldn't help thinking about how close we'd come to losing everything. Looking around that room, I couldn't stop thinking about how differently my life could have turned out. If I had trusted a stranger's accusation more than the man I loved, none of us would have been standing there. If I'd reacted emotionally instead of asking questions, Vanessa might have succeeded. If Ryan and I hadn't trusted each other enough to investigate the situation together, our relationship might have collapsed before the truth ever surfaced. Instead, we learned something neither of us will ever forget. Trust isn't built when life is easy. Trust is built when someone gives you a reason to doubt and you choose to search for the truth instead of the quickest answer. Vanessa lost Ryan because she tried to manipulate reality into becoming what she wanted. Ryan and I survived because we faced reality together, even when it was painful. And as I stood beside my husband on our wedding day, surrounded by people who genuinely wanted the best for us, I realized something. Looking back now, the scariest part isn't what Vanessa did. It's how close she came to succeeding. If I had believed those screenshots without asking questions, I would have lost the man I eventually married. One phone call could have changed the entire course of my life. Ryan and I didn't survive because we were lucky. We survived because we chose the truth over assumptions. And every time I look at my husband, I'm grateful we made that choice.